Welcome back, everybody. Today is Monday, August 26th, and we are continuing our discussion of section 1.2, where we're looking at the nature of science. Now, we just went over all this, but our last class, we kind of laid out this idea of the scientific method, or a framework or process of scientific inquiry that we will use in here. And we're going to continue on. We don't have a ton of stuff today. Like, we're almost done with the chapter already. So, we have looked at this a lot of different times, and we've spoke about it over and over, but we're just going to highlight it. RJ and Fred, just so you guys know, I outline stuff, which is I have a very specific format. When you see it, you don't have to write this yet. Bullet point is what I'll use for like the main idea, and then subtopics related to that will be a tilde. Now, beyond the tilde, I'll use a dash, and then if we have to go one layer further, I'll use a star or an asterisk. Vocab will always be pure capital. So if I use all caps or caps lock when I'm writing, which caps lock isn't the right word, I don't know what you would call it. If I'm writing in all caps, you'll know it's a vocab. All right, so we have a new main topic, and we're going to have several today that are really kind of short. But our first one, and this is going to be really brief, we are going to be looking at science in everyday life. Now, one of the big things that we spoke a lot about together was like, what are the benefits of science and some of the scientific achievements within the world of biology? Remember, that varies wildly. New medicines to treat diseases, new ways to prevent disease, ways to make crops grow better, grow faster. All of those different things are really implementing biological sciences. Now, when you are at home, and you guys probably don't watch the news every morning, I would guess. Right? Does anybody watch the news every morning? Occasionally? Okay. Does stuff show up on your Insta, or does Snap have a feed?
My phone has like an installed app where I log in every single day. It shows me the time I didn't use.
Okay. I turn all those off because I don't like the phone company deciding who I go to for my news. But you do get to see some of it. So, yep. I turn it off automatically. I'm not going to let it eat my data for that. I'm not going to, I'll go find my own sources. However, in your everyday life, and I'm not, you don't have your phones right now, just a couple things that show up really regularly. Now, notice I skipped the tilde and the dash because this is such a short section. Really common things that you guys will see presented as scientific stuff in the news. Reports of new disease. So we have unfortunately lived through a global pandemic. And in the early days of COVID, you guys were what grade when COVID hit? Six. So you probably didn't really hear a whole lot about it, just like on your phones. I don't know if sixth graders have phones and stuff, to be honest. But reports of new disease happen. What's the last big global pandemic? COVID-19. Ooh, it actually wasn't COVID. That was the last major one that was everywhere. But every year. Ooh, that's the new one right now. Monkeypox is the new alleged one coming out. Maybe it'll materialize. So you're talking bird flu, H1N1. Every year we get reports of the flu, right? Like, the flu is a global pandemic every single year. And inevitably you will start in the coming weeks, if you pay attention to that, you'll start seeing like, this year's flu, the deadliest ever, and you take it with a grain of salt, because they say and they name their titles to get you to click on it. Because the more people that click, the more money they make. Even if the flu's not the deadliest, if they make that claim, it might encourage you to click on it. So there's one sort of thing that we're going to wind up seeing science show up all the time. Do you guys watch TV shows?
Sometimes. It's mostly like everyone, all the teenagers are just on TikTok.
So not news. Like, you guys, is TV not really a thing anymore that people do?
I feel like it's not.
Okay, that's fair. TikTok is probably the better way to do this. I'm just going to say media in general, whether it's TikTok or Snap or Insta. What are some other ones? You guys probably aren't really Facebook people. That's Insta. Meta owns both of them. Cool. Me too, man. All right. Now, what I think of this, one of the shows that I like, cop shows. I love cop shows. Law and Order, SVU. Like, that's my bungung. Yeah. Oh, I've seen every episode, so many times, because I just always have USA on if I'm not watching stuff. However, you will see science show up there, Big Bang, wherever it might be, TV shows. So specifically, the sciences that are linked to biology, you're going to see references to forensics. Investigation Discovery, if you ever hear, or people who follow podcasts about like true crime stuff, which have kind of exploded in the last few years, forensics is huge. Like, there are some issues with it. Fingerprints are obviously, they've been around for a long time. DNA evidence is getting more and more common. Maybe those aren't entirely presented in a true way online. So I think of forensics or medical shows. So I don't know of any like currently running medical shows right now, but they do happen. Or you probably on my YouTube stuff, chiropractic stuff has been showing up a lot more frequently of people getting like really aggressively popped where it looks dangerous. I don't know if they're real or not, but here's the important thing. When you see science in your everyday life, whether it shows up, no matter where you get it, with the exception of, even from me, realistically, even from me, if you get new science, I have something that I need us all to be aware of. I'm going to leave a space intentionally because this one's really important. What matters as you guys, as consumers of this information, is it is really important that we together can work out a way to identify, or what's the shorthand for ID? For identify. ID. We need to know how to identify, and I'm just going to shorthand it with ID, what is real science. And it sounds like that was the end of it, but we're going to sneak a word in here. Real science. And what is, and I'm going to pause this here for a second. In this class, my preconceived kind of notions will probably be true. Anybody know your sign, your zodiac sign?
Pisces.
You're a Pisces? What are you? Okay, that's not a bad sign. Sorry to hear that, man. What are you? Cancer? Capricorn? Hey, me too. Okay, so that whole field of zodiac and all that stuff, do you know what it's called?
Astrology.
Astrology. Is astrology, like if we just look at that, remember logi means the study of, and astro meaning space. Is that a science? Kind of. Why kind of?
Like that, since it is.
And it's like, I don't know, it's because I've always seen pictures, like, you know, astrology, the first thing I see when I search it up on Google is like images of space, and it's just like, there's science behind it, holding, like, it's following.
So I would say it's based on science. It's based on it. Now, realistically, depending, and sorry if this comes off as offensive, the fact that I was born and I happen to be a Capricorn, does that really have any true influence on my life, do you think? No. Now, the fact that that happens, we need to make sure we can identify what is real science, and then we're going to maybe learn a new word. I'm not just going to say fake science. We use a specific word, pseudo. Pseudo is the root, and we're looking at pseudoscience. What is real science, like actual repeatable and true scientific work and knowledge, compared to what is pseudoscience or not really truly science? Now, it may be based on it, but if you find a scientist who believes something and you present them evidence to show like, hey, your belief is wrong, a good scientist will go, well, that sucks that I was wrong, but good, now I know more. Let's correct this idea. Let's move past it. Let's make sure we get to the real truth. If I provide evidence to somebody who is really into astrology that disagrees with them, they're not going to say, oh, well, let's really look into that. Let's make sure we get it. Astrology is going to say, no, you're wrong, and you're not going to build any knowledge off of it. Pseudoscience is not real science. It will be presented as though it is, but be really, really, really careful. You'll see it all over the place. Juice cleanses, like, hey, try this 14-day fast where you just drink this juice and it'll clean out your liver. Nope, that's not how it works. Certainly your liver has a lot more needed to clean it than just a juice diet or whatever the case is. Be careful of pseudoscience and being able to pick it out.
So it's like fiction. Right?
Fiction, fake science, yeah, absolutely. It's maybe based on something true, but just enough to make people believe it. Okay. So what that really comes down to, and these are really quick today, so I'm going to switch to another main topic. What we're really focusing on is our goal is to really increase what is known as our scientific literacy. Whether we hear it or listen to it or read it, doesn't matter. We need to make sure that we can start to pick out what is real science as compared with pseudoscience. So, when we want to be scientifically literate, which I hope every single person here does, because it means that all of this new information that you're getting, you're going to be better prepared to deal with it and really pick out what's true and what's not. Scientific literacy, and this, I'm not going to give you a vocab for this, but I'm just going to define it for us. This is going to combine two things. When we talk about being scientifically literate, we are going to combine a basic understanding of science. We don't have to be professionals. We just need a basic understanding, which the scientific method or that framework will give us a basic understanding. I know how to spell, I promise. I just stopped writing mid-word. There we go. Combine a basic understanding of science, which we all have and we'll get better understanding throughout the year. But there's another key aspect, and critical thinking. Okay, that language of critical thinking, it shows up over and over in classes, and we can think critically about many things. In the world of math, it shows up, that's where I'm most associated with, but realistically, you should think critically all the time. Okay, now, beyond this, again, I want to stress, beware of pseudoscience. Don't fall for the trap. If you hear something that sounds too good to be true, it probably is. If you hear something that with your understanding of science makes you go, is that really how it works? If you have to pause and have that thought, that's a pretty good indication that probably not really how it works. Now, within science, there's two things, and we looked at them, basic understanding of science and critical thinking, but I want to zoom in a little bit on them. Now, when we are looking at science and being literate with science, one of the concerns that we have to make sure that we're aware of is ethics. Now, if I asked, and have you guys heard of ethics first and foremost? Have you heard of being ethical?
Yeah.
Okay, what does that mean? What if I said be moral?
Ethical, like being simple, I guess.
So not simple, that's a good thought. Ethical and moral kind of go together. If we talk about one's morals, do you know what we're referring to?
Kind of like having remorse.
Could be, it depends. Murder, good or bad?
Oh, like
Maybe it depends on the situation, but I think that we can all agree that for the most part, murder is bad. Okay, we have the similar moral there. Now, whether it's good or bad really depends on the person and the context, I think. But when we talk about ethics, it's something that we have to pay really careful attention to. You guys don't buy a ton of makeup, I don't imagine, but oftentimes you'll see not tested on animals. It used to be tested on animals, and we tested a ton of stuff on animals. And oftentimes those animals would get really sick or really injured in the process. When we look at ethics, and it's going to be really important focus of ours, we're going to make sure that we follow ethical guidelines. So specifically, we'll say that these are, lost my line of thought, specific guidelines during an experiment. During an experiment. That prioritize and really emphasize how important it is. They prioritize the well-being specific guidelines during an experiment that prioritize the well-being of the subjects, so we'll just say of subjects, and the environment. And it can be tricky sometimes to figure this out. When we look at new medicines, and one of my good friends is a doctor of biochemistry, and what she does is she studies very specific diseases that happen in wildlife populations. So she studies diseases that happen in moose, specifically down south. Now, if you're trying to learn how to treat that disease and maybe start preventing it in a wild moose population, you don't want to go out and get a moose and infect it and kill a big giant moose in that process and then have to do that with thousands and thousands of moose, right? Like, it doesn't make sense to kill thousands of them just to try to learn a little bit about a disease. But there's value in learning that disease, because if the moose fall, then maybe wolf and bear populations start to fall, and then maybe vegetation starts to overgrow, which just destroys everything. So where does my friend, Dr. Dadalahi is her name, who do you think she tests stuff on? She can't infect moose after moose after moose, but she has to infect an animal, right? What does she infect?
Rabbit.
Mice. Lab rats and lab mice get used constantly. Now, they are bred in a very specific way. Their entire purpose, the meaning of their life, is to further scientific knowledge, which is kind of dark. She had a really hard time when she was starting to do this sort of stuff. She had to kill mice, and she has to kill mice like pretty much every day. Now she's doing some other stuff. But is it ethical to kill the mice in pursuit of bettering that knowledge? Maybe, right? Like, the science community has agreed that sure, and sometimes that line's kind of hard to draw. Other times it's not. If I'm a biologist and I want to study the ants or termite mounds, for example, that are in the middle of the Amazon, but termite mounds are underneath all this canopy, can I burn down the forest so I can get a better look at those termite mounds?
No.
I mean, I could. Would that be the wrong thing to do?
Yeah.
Ethically, we agree it's not worth doing that for that pursuit of knowledge. Yes, sir.
Wait, how does a mice connect to like every animal?
So it doesn't directly. However, we understand the physiology of mice. So if we infect a mouse with a disease that's going to like kill moose, and we see how the mouse immune system reacts to it and whether this treatment or not works, we can then expand that out and tweak it before we start having to worry about actually testing on mice or on moose. Same thing with people. If we have a new experimental drug that, hey, this drug might work, but maybe it won't, you don't want to just pick a person and say, hey, you have a curable disease and we have a new treatment that could kill you. Like, that wouldn't be right. Human life, I think we can agree, is more important than the life of a mouse. I'm pretty sure of that, but that's a whole ethics idea. Now, we will have to pay attention to ethics. There are codes and guidelines that people follow. Dissection happens in biology, but you have to make sure that animal is dead before you dissect it, right? You're not going to cause undue pain and suffering on an animal in the pursuit of science. Okay, beyond that, I'm not going to write this one out, but is it possible that Fred publishes his study, and I don't know what we're studying, let's just hypothetically say, Fred decides that, hey, A happens. And then RJ publishes, no, A doesn't happen, B happens. Could we have two completely opposite conclusions from two different scientists?
Yeah.
So how do we know who's right?
Well,
Evidence.
Yeah, you look for evidence supporting it, right? And there could be evidence that supports both. It is our job, as we're looking at those, to keep adjusting knowledge as more and more evidence supports it, right? So evolution initially, people thought that animals changed directly to adapt to the environment specifically. So the easiest example is giraffes existed, but as giraffes ate all the leaves, to get bigger leaves, they had to grow longer necks. Like, that's how people thought of evolution at first. That's not how it happened. It's not like they adjusted specifically to that. Something happened by coincidence that made the giraffe have a little bit longer neck, and then it was able to prosper above all the others, and that gene started being replicated further down the line. Okay, so as we're looking at these, ethics we have to be concerned with. We also have to be able to think critically, but we just discussed that. The last one, and you guys, I think it was RJ, but we need to make sure that we can examine the evidence. Now, it is not reasonable to expect that you or I are going to really dig into formal research papers on any particular topic, because like formal published research in the field of biology or any scientific field is going to be so far beyond what we understand about biology that maybe it doesn't mean a ton to us initially. When we're looking at this, there are some easy things that we can do though. When we talk about examining the evidence, there's a few different things we want to make sure we're cool with. The first off is, how were these results reached? How were results reached? And this goes back to that idea of you'll see stuff like in the media. If all of a sudden I see there's a headline, and I haven't seen it, but I'm sure it's existed, a cure for cancer discovered. That's a huge headline, right?
Yes.
If I see that headline, should I just go, oh, good, they discovered the cure, that's awesome? No, because there's going to be follow-up questions. I'm sorry, Fred?
I was gonna say, look at the evidence that was followed by it, because you normally just click on the heading, it takes you to like a whole article or whatever.
For sure, which means like that's exactly what we're doing right here, right? We go to that article and we'll look. Now, in that case, I can think of a situation where somebody could have that headline because they've demonstrated that one particular drug was able to kill one particular type of cancer cell. And they could say cancer's cured. Like, that's not a lie, it's just misrepresenting maybe. But there's a ton of different stuff that we can consider as we're trying to look at how were these results reached. So lots of different ways. First off, we can say empirically, which this just means, is there a lot of data? If I have a scientist that said, I have successfully killed one cancer cell with this drug, does that really mean as much anymore? No, a single cancer cell killed by this drug, that's a good sign, but there's not enough numerical evidence to really justify. Empirically just means, is there, like, do the numbers back it up? So maybe we reach it empirically. If I have a sample of 10 that says, hey, I killed 10 cancer cells with this drug, but then a larger study said, hey, we tried it on 1,000 and it only killed 20. Those could be the same results, right?
Yeah.
But you have to make sure you're looking at how big were the numbers. What sort of experiment was conducted? Was it controlled? Did they take really careful care to make sure that there's not other factors that could be influencing the outcome? Have to think about the experiment. The big one. If the person who published this paper was a company that makes pharmaceutical drugs. So let's say Holloway Incorporated makes cancer treatments, and then a scientist that works for Holloway Incorporated came out and said, Holloway Incorporated drug cures science. Would that make you be concerned at all? The person that I pay to study the drug that we've designed with my money to make money off of, right? They claim it works. Do you trust that person completely?
No.
Probably not, just by themselves, because there might be a monetary or a money influence, right? Like, of course I'm going to pay a scientist to say my drug worked better than all the others. I'm paying them and I want my drug to sell. So you need to make sure that we are encountering bias. And I think we used the oil and gas industry the other day. If Exxon comes out and says, gas really doesn't pollute, maybe I don't trust it if it's from Exxon just right off the bat, unless it's been repeated and replicated over and over and over. Okay. Are we cool with at least the basic way that we can start to build our scientific literacy? Okay. Last thing. And in your book, like, you guys are always welcome to read, just so you know, every note that I take comes out of your book. Anything that I write down is out of the text. I'm going to add a lot of my own stuff just as we chat. But this last one, this order is very different, and they don't make as big of a point of it as I'm going to. We have an important distinction. And I would argue it's the most important distinction, and it aids in our understanding and our literacy within science. An important distinction. Okay. In science, everything has to be based on evidence. I made the comment the other day, we cannot prove a hypothesis true. We can never be certain that it is straight up true. We can say that it's supported by the evidence, and there's like a lot of evidence for it, but you can never say it's completely true, because the whole role of science is what's true today, true or supported today, hopefully tomorrow is no longer supported, which leads to newer and better discoveries. So 2 really important distinctions. Can you guys think of any controversial topics that we'll probably cover in here? And I'm sure we've already talked about it. I've already mentioned it today, depending on disease. I wouldn't say disease is super controversial, depending on the disease. Evolution can be kind of controversial. Okay, just as a reminder, your personal beliefs and my personal beliefs are irrelevant. We are in a biology, a science course, so we're going to treat evolution as a scientific idea. Now, when we talk about evolution, first thing, do you know the person that we attribute it to? So Lucy was Australopithecus. We looked at Lucy last week. Cool that you brought that up. She was an early type of human, but she's not the one that provided this idea first. Charles Darwin. Darwin. Okay, now, if I'm up here talking about evolution, and we're not going into like everything right now, but am I going to get up here and tell you the law of evolution?
No, law of Darwin.
So it's not the law of evolution. It's the what of evolution? Starts with a T.
Theory.
Theory. So we see two different things that we really need to be able to parse. And I'm going to make this vocab. The first one is we have what is known as scientific theory. Now, this word gets used all over the place, and there's I completely get why one would misinterpret it. If I come up with an idea, just my own idea, can I call it a scientific theory? No. And people think that you can. If there's somebody else who has completely different belief about evolution, and they suggest no, this is what I think happens, this is my hypothesis, it's not a theory. It can be their own personal belief and their own personal theory, but it does not qualify as a scientific theory, like the theory of evolution or the theory of gravity, which maybe is much less controversial, but it still has the same meaning. When you see theory, don't look at it and think, oh, this is just one person's thoughts on the matter. That is not how theories are developed. When we look at a scientific theory, and my definition coming right now, a scientific theory is an explanation So a theory is scientific theory is an explanation of phenomenon, which is just all these natural events, whatever it might be, phenomenon, based on many experiments and observations. I'm going to put slash because it could be one or the other. It must be based on many experiments or observations over time. Okay. Now, this is essentially just a fancy hypothesis, but it goes beyond that. And I'm not going to write all this, but I'll wait till you guys get caught up. It's just a hypothesis, but there's an important thing that gets added. If I have a hypothesis for how or why something happens, the explanation of what happened and how it happened and all of that, and I come up with a hypothesis, science's job is to try to show that that doesn't work, right? Now, if we think of, for example, Darwinism or evolution, he proposed this idea, and right off the bat, a lot of people said, whoa, I don't like it, and people started to try to disprove it. Scientists all over the world for the last 100-something years, almost 200 years now, I guess 150, have been trying to disprove it, to show that this doesn't work. Every single attempt to scientifically disprove it without religion showing up at all has failed, and it's never been shown to be false. Every experiment and observation ever within that context has given evidence for the theory of evolution. Now, it doesn't become a theory until every other possible experiment and test to try to disprove it has been completed and been shown to fail. So when you have a theory, it's an explanation of this, but it's based on those experiments over a large amount of time with people trying to disprove it. If it cannot be scientifically disproven, after all possible considerations are made, it is moved to a theory. With that in mind, does it mean that tomorrow new evidence couldn't come out that disproves it? No, tomorrow maybe a new experiment eventually does come out that shows it's not true, in which case science goes, yes, bummer that we've been wrong for so long, but awesome that we get to start refining this knowledge. Okay, more simply put, an EG, it just says hey, an example for this, it's not example, it stands for exempli gratia in Latin, which is literally for example. Okay, EG, when we look at these, what I want you to remember with scientific theory, theory is the what, the why, I'm going to put that in quotations, or how something occurs. So it's the explanation of what causes this thing to happen. So for example, and I'll wait till you guys catch up with this. Evolution can be controversial, but there's plenty of theories that aren't. Germ theory is now it's probably better as a law. We're going to use a different one. Let's use the theory of gravity. Do you guys agree that gravity exists?
Yeah.
Okay, that's not a theory. The fact that I say it exists doesn't make it a theory. Like, because I'm not answering the why or the how. Why does gravity exist? Or how does gravity work? That's like a question. Do you guys know?
Doesn't it hold you down?
So yeah, that's what it does, but that's not the why or the how. Like, I'm attracted to the Earth by gravity, and you don't notice it, but the gravity of me also attracts the Earth in the same amount towards me. So like, we're in this interlocking thing. You and I are attracted through gravity right now, but we're stronger than gravity because it's really, really weak for whatever reason. Now, everybody knows that gravity exists. Like, we don't doubt it. Like, I can see it, and we'll talk about that here in a second. Old Albert Einstein came up with the idea that has stood the test of time up to now to be the theory of gravity. Einstein decided through his work with like pretty complex physics and math that space and time are the same thing, first of all, and that when you have, like, let's say here's space, and it's two-dimensional. If you were to put a bowling ball on it, it does this. Have you guys ever seen those things that you put coins in and they spin around?
Yeah.
That's Einstein's whole idea. He says, wait, heavy things bend space. And it turns out that they also bend time. And that does happen. We have to adjust for that when we use GPS and things like that. But the theory of gravity that Einstein says that gravity is just the misshaping of space and the fabric of space and time. And it's been demonstrated. We use that fact all the time. But it's just a theory because it's trying to say this is what causes gravity. Now, in contrast with that, the theory of relativity or theory of gravity exists. That's the why or the how something happens. The what, like the specific thing that does happen, isn't a theory. So what's stronger than a theory?
Hypothesis.
So a fact, a hypothesis could become a theory eventually, Fred. That was a good thought. We're going to sneak in our next one. This is the last thing we're going to write for the chapter. Rather than a theory, you could have a scientific law. The law of conservation of momentum, or the law of universal gravitation, things like that. As we go through scientific law, this is simply going to describe a relationship in nature, and I'll say a natural relationship to shorten that, describes a natural relationship under specific conditions. Okay. So, subtle difference, but an important one. The theory tells me the why or the how something happens. The law just says the what happens. If two objects are in space, do they attract to each other? That's the law of universal gravitation. Any two objects in the entire universe are attracted to each other. It happens. Just now when I said two objects are attracted, did I give you any indication of why or how that occurs? If my only statement is two objects are attracted to each other through gravity, does that statement indicate any of the reasoning behind it? No, I'm just telling you the exact what happens or the relationship in nature. So, easy way to put this. And when you are asked to give a definition of something, I'm okay if you use these EG ones. If a theory is the why or how, the law is the what. That's it. We don't attempt at all to describe how or why. It's just the what specifically happens. For the law of conservation of mass, if I burn something, no mass disappears. None. Now, it might weigh less on a scale if you let smoke go away, but it's because you've let the smoke go away and carry away particles and things like that. Law is the what, theory is the why or how. All right. That was the first chapter. And that's super chill, I hope. It's just kind of a review. This evening, you don't have a ton of time to start right now, but I do want us to attempt the assignment. And we should talk for a minute. So this evening, what I want you to do, and I'll put this on the Google Classroom instead. So today, and I'll edit this here. Let's see, it's the 26th today. Cool. 8, 26, 24. I'll zoom way in. We just did a lesson 1.2.2. it was still scientific law, or I say literacy. Scientific literacy. I'll put a YouTube link here in a second. The homework this evening. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I want you to do for me homework 1.2, which you will find on page 16. And I want you to answer as best you can. Let me verify that we're not going to get a one that I don't want again. I think it's 1 through 5, but let me double check that. Yep, 1 through 5 is good. So this will be due tomorrow with the understanding of how much time do I want you guys to spend on homework outside of class? 30 minutes. If you get to the 30-minute mark and you're actually like working for 30 minutes, not on TikTok and your papers in front of you, stop at 30 minutes. If you don't finish it, it says that we should probably clear up some stuff. Try to bring this tomorrow. Tomorrow at the start of class, I'll have some vocab stuff, and then we'll start to decide how we want quiz or test or whatever. Do it on a sheet of paper, please. Yep, I'll probably have you hand it in. If you guys need to grab paper from me, I can hook you up. But class is over, and you guys, welcome back. I'll get you copies of the notes. I'll come track you down. 2 things just